So I am on Facebook Live right now. Welcome everybody who are on Facebook Live. My apologies. I was just looking at my list. Just said, why aren't anybody joining the Facebook Live page today? My fault. So once again, people in Facebook Live, welcome. My apologies for not signing on. And let me just repeat that again. Now I'm going to get Kevin on later on very quickly. And if you have any questions for him, go ahead and use the Facebook Live comments, and he will be able to kind of answer the questions as we go along. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, let us put our virtual hands together. And welcome, Kevin Eyre all the way from UK, right? Let's go. Hello, hello, hello. Very good morning, Kevin. Well, absolutely, it's my great pleasure to be able to say that the SoundWave is the best kept secret, because the truth is that a lot of people never really knew what it is, and today it's really my great pleasure to be able to kind of get you on live here together with me, and to talk a little bit about SoundWave. For the first two seasons, Kevin, if you've been following us, we've been talking about the power of communication, and the art of conversation lies in listening. And I've been using the SoundWave framework, the SoundWave methodology, or the emphasis in helping people understand this whole idea of what communication is all about. So very quickly, right, let's jump straight in today. Tell us very quickly, what is SoundWave? What is that all about?
Concepts, tools, methods, assessments that help us rethink the way in which we talk, and help us to analyze the way we talk, the way other people talk, for the purpose, to repeat myself, of making communication more productive. And in that vein, what we're seeking to do is have people own their conversations, be really conscious of the way they talk, structure their communication so that it's helpful to the process of two-way conversation. I'll stop at that point, because otherwise I'll take up all of your 45 minutes just in answering that question.
That would be my pleasure, because it makes my job really, really easy then, right? So I just want to jump right in really quickly here, Kevin. One of the things that, you and I, we've been talking a lot about this before, and I think part of this is really through our own observations as well as through our practice in our businesses. Now, you often say that people are very unconscious in the way they talk. How true is that? I mean, from your observations, how true is it that people are unconscious, and how do you know that they are unconscious in the way they talk?
Okay, so that's a really good question. So let me refine it a little bit. I think that what happens is most of us are brought up, and the first time we encounter language and its use is in our family context. So like many other facets of our behavior, the sorts of things we say and how we say them get socialized very early in our lives. And essentially we start to form little patterns and little habits, as we do in just about all aspects of our behavior. And those little patterns and little habits tend to stay with us over time. But of course they get modified through other processes of socialization. So, when I go to school, when I go to work, I learn different types of language, and I adapt my language to suit the context in which I'm in, because ultimately I have to fit in, and language is a very, very powerful way for fitting in and for changing things. So when I say that people are not conscious, of course we're conscious that we're talking, of course we're conscious that we're saying things, but we might not be aware, for example, that we have a strong tendency to give people answers to their problems all the time. We just might feel we're being helpful, and which of course we are, at least that's our intention. But what we might inadvertently be doing by always giving up people answers to their problems is stopping them working them out themselves. And what we might be doing to ourselves is limiting the opportunity to do something else, which is a very natural thing, which is to ask really good questions. Okay, so we have a sort of bias. You might be somebody who has a preference for telling people what to do in a very constructive way. I might be a person who has a strong preference for asking people what they think about things. And we might not be fully aware that that is our fundamental bias or preference. Except that when we come together and we start to talk about it, we might discover that. And what we need, you need the ability to tell and ask, and I need the ability to ask and tell. We need range across all possible types of communication. So we're sort of unaware of, perhaps being unaware is a better word than unconscious, but we're sort of unaware of what our key preferences are. And SoundWave, one of the things SoundWave does, it helps us to become aware of what those preferences happen to be.
So are you saying, right, Kevin, that we all have different preferences in the way we talk? Can we change that? Can we change the way we talk? Is this something so ingrained in us that it becomes so habitual that, you know how it is, where sometimes you're talking to people, you go like, yeah, John is always like that. That's the way he talks. He can never change the way he does things, right? So can our talk change, from your experience? What have you seen at the workplace? What have you seen in your interventions that actually, talk can change?
So the answer is yes, the talk can change, but I want to come back to something very important that you said there, Kim Pong, which is that we quite often tend to characterize people in terms of the things they say, precisely as you just said. John's a nice guy, but have you heard he's always complaining about stuff? Okay, now the John always complaining is a consequence of having heard him verbalize complaints over a long and consistent period of time. So could John stop complaining? Well, John can stop complaining if two things happen. A, if he becomes aware of just how much complaining he does, and in SoundWave terms, that might be somebody with a strong preference for criticizing, for example. So the moment he becomes aware of it, and he becomes aware of the negative consequences of that, as well as some potential positive consequences, he might think he needs to make a change. And then what he needs is to be given an alternative. What could you substitute this constant complaining and criticizing for? What would happen, John, if you were just to ask people a few questions? Or were you just to summarize the sort of thing that somebody had said to you? Okay. And so this is my theoretical answer to your question. The practical answer is yes. I mean, the work we do in organizations with leaders, quite often we come across people who have quite strong preferences for advising and telling others what to do. And back to the point I made earlier, which is the motive is good, people are trying to help, but what they do inadvertently is create small degrees of dependence amongst the people that work with. Now we know if we point this out to people, and if we get them to do something like ask people what they think instead, that people can make that switch. The nuance is that some people find it tougher than others. There are small numbers of people who find it very difficult not to give people answers, not to tell people what to do, and to ask or explain instead. But what we notice is that with some help, they all get better than they currently are. Nobody came into the world with the ability only to speak in one way. Okay, we actually all have the plastic linguistic apparatus to do whatever we want. It's just we get socialized and pushed into certain ways of speaking and being. And that's what we're up against. But categorically, it is possible to make changes. Some people more than others.
Yeah, and I love what you're just talking about, that we are, what's the word that you, plastic, right? That we are able to be moldable in the way we talk, in the way we listen to people. So from your experience and through the SoundWave research, Kevin, what are you, in your mind, right? What are the top three, well, not top three, but what are three things that people need to have in order for them to be able to change the way they talk, change the way they converse, with different levels of society or different levels of people that they interact with?
Well, the first one is an understanding. The first one is an understanding of how they currently do things, how they currently talk. And in a SoundWave context, we can do that with people completing assessments, self-perception, 360. 360 is fantastic because you get feedback not on how you think you talk, but actually on how you're heard. And that's very powerful. People get sometimes a little bit of surprise, occasionally even a little bit of shock of what they're hearing. The other thing is real-time conversation. So people get an opportunity to be recorded real-time in conversations, and they then listen to the recorded and interpret them. What was I saying? How was I saying it? In our technical terms, what voices was I using? What impact was that having on people? So all those techniques, if you like, all those techniques and tools are available to help people generate a level of understanding. Where am I at? The other thing that's then really important is for somebody to have a sense of in what direction do I want to change? Okay, is there a reason why it would be better for me to increase the range or the versatility of the way in which I speak? So somebody, for instance, in the extreme case, somebody may be experiencing some difficulty in their relationships, and they've had some feedback that says, you know, you're so harsh with people, you're really tough on people. And they're thinking, I don't really understand this, you know, because it's not what I'm intending to do. It just comes out like that. Okay, so we might take that specific issue and work with people and say, okay, we can now understand why it happens. The question is, what do we replace it with? And then the third piece would be practice. Like all changes in the world, the only way in which you cement capability beyond just having an idea of what is right in your head is to practice it. And that's really important and really fascinating. So people can practice through coaching. Coaching is a great way to get support. When people have an understanding, they can just practice by themselves. We get a lot of feedback from people who say, you know what, I went home today and I practiced on my daughter. And I think to myself, oh my God, I don't know what's coming next, but I'm feeling quite fearful. But then they go on to say, and you know, it was a really good conversation. It was one of the best conversations I had in months with my daughter or my son or my wife or my husband, whoever it might be. So those are the things. I think first it's getting a good level of understanding, Ken Pong. Then it's about clarifying the direction that you want to move in. And then it's practicing that and continuing to practice it.
I love it. You know, towards the end, you said something that you talk about. What's the word that you use? That you're having great conversations with people, right? And I remember, you know, when I was in when I was in UK, and you know, we were spending some time together. And you told me this, and that kind of stuck and burned into my brains for a long time. You said this amazing things happen between people when the quality of the conversation is great. Tell me, I mean, tell everybody here in the audience a little bit more about what you mean by that. Amazing things happen between people when the quality of the conversations are good.
Yeah, so your question, Kim Pong, was about the greatness of conversation. Amazing things happen when the quality of the conversation is good. And you were asking me about, you know, how I come to that view. I think that to some extent we live in a world where often the quality of the conversation is not good. You know, actually there isn't a conversation. We live in a world which is full of sound bites to some extent. But most of us have the experience of having been in situations where you sort of get lost in the flow of conversation. There is a problem that you're trying to solve. There's a strategy you're trying to work out. There's a personal life ambition that you're trying to work through with friends, and you're completely absorbed in the flow of the conversation. And that's a consequence of people listening to each other really well, exploring what each other is saying, and as a consequence of that, generating ideas, concepts, futures, which were just never part of the conversation when we first began it. These emerge fluidly and fluently from the quality of the conversation. And just a small point, actually, I'm one of the things I like to say, Kim Pong, is that actually we're all brilliant communicators. If you think about what you and I are doing just at this moment, and we're no different to most other people, we're just having a conversation, it tends to flow. The amount of information we're sharing between each other is enormous. If you were to break it all down into little bits of data, you know, we'd have rows of ones and zeros across about 100,000 pages of paper. We don't even think about this, it just happens. So if we're so good at it, why do we need to improve it? Because although we're brilliant at it, we still have habits around it, and those habits can be somewhat constraining in some circumstances. So I think we're really good communicators, really quite incredible communicators. but there's always room for improvement, and that's where we're looking at. That's what takes, you know, everyday chit chat into something that could be, you know, quite transformational.
I love it. I love it. I mean, to hear you say that, you know, we actually are great communicators. I think that not just to me, but I think to everybody who's listening in, you know, that's a great encouragement. I mean, it's like, you know, hey, all my life I grew up thinking that I can't talk well, but here's a guy here that's telling me that I have the potential of being able to talk really, really well. So that is really, really cool. Now, before I go on to the next question, I just want to reach out again to those people in Facebook Live, if you're still on. You know, I think we have put on the Zoom link for you. So, you know, get out Facebook and join us on Zoom so that you can continue to catch, you know, the remaining of the sessions here, right? So thank you very much. And once again, our apologies. So coming back to Kevin, I want to segue a little bit right now, right? And I want to knock down some myth. So a lot of times when people talk about, you know, how do you communicate effectively? Now, more often than not, if you were to ask, you know, if you were to Google how to communicate effectively, more often than not, this whole idea of non-verbal cues kind of popped up, right? You got to nod your head, you got to look for the, you know, the non-verbal gestures, you got to say, aha, you got to go all kinds of stuff, right? So I would love to hear your view on this, right? What is that all about? Are non-verbal cues that critical in the quality of conversations?
So conversation is essentially at its most heightened when it is face to face. You know, two people in front of each other, looking at each other. And of course, what's happening is we're picking up lots of visual cues as well as lots of verbal information. But the experiment to run is take the language out. Just take the ability to speak out of it and just look at each other and ask yourself the question, how good is our communication going to be at that point? Okay. And it would plummet. It would plummet. You know, fundamentally, human beings communicate through language. That is the point of difference over the apes of this world. Now, so what does that mean for the physical behavior? It means that fundamentally they work in tandem with our talk. So you can see me on screen now. I'm gesturing with my hands. I'm gesturing with my face. These movements have meaning precisely because they're connected to what I'm saying. Take away what I'm saying, and I could just be waving at somebody across the other side of the room, and you have no idea what's really going on. What I think is interesting is there's a notion which is very current in, you know, the management literature, which is something along the lines, and the percentages vary, but, you know, 80% of communication is nonverbal. Well, it's not. It simply is not. There is no factual basis for that. And for people who are interested to know where the source of that information comes from, they should take a look at a piece of work by a man called Albert Mirabia and some experiments that he ran, probably in the 1970s or 1980s, which seems to be the source of this piece of data, which, like in so many things, has been just, I think, miscommunicated, misinformed. So I won't say any more about his work, but take a look at that. So the fundamental thing here, Kim Pong, is that, you know, language is a precision instrument. Language can get you into highly, highly specific concepts, ideas, practices, futures, histories, biographies, in a way that gesture simply cannot. I'm not saying it's unimportant. I think it is critically important. It's part of what makes us human. But without the sound, without the language, it pales into much less significance.
So where is nonverbal cues? Where is the place that nonverbal cues play in conversations like ours? What does it do?
Well, it's information. It helps you construct meaning when you're talking to somebody. I mean, you could, for example, be saying something very lovely to me, but, you know, looking askance and narrowing your eyes and scowling at me slightly. And actually what I might feel is a mixed message. Okay, you know, what's going on here? Well, that's the phenomenon that we have. You know, what our brains are able to do is to take these different pieces of information, put them together and ask ourselves, does that make sense? Is there
Mm-hmm.
consistency in what I'm experiencing here? So where gestures align, or we think gestures are in alignment with what somebody is saying, that gives us a sense of confidence in the communication. If those two things are moving in opposite directions, you're looking one way and saying something which seems to be in contrast to that or contradistinction to that, then I might start to feel uncomfortable. That will have an immediate impact on how I feel about our communication, probably how I feel about a relationship, and what I then go on to say. The likelihood is it puts me in a place where I start to become much more cautious in what I'm saying, much more circumspect. It will probably reduce the quality of our conversation and possibly the quality of our relationship. So these things are important, Kim Pong, but I think the world has become slightly obsessed with all of this non-verbal behavior at the expense of understanding conversation and talk. And so actually, if SoundWave has a mission, it's to plug the gap, it's to heighten the relevance of talk in our communication, make us much more aware of how important it is and understanding what we're doing with it.
Yeah. And how do people then know about how they talk, what they do? How does SoundWave help people at large in understanding this?
Well, I suppose I'd just repeat a little bit of what I said earlier, which is that the opportunity to complete assessments. So for those people who are interested, there's what we call the B3, the Brilliance 3 report, 10 minutes online, a report which gives you quite a lot of detail about your top 3 voices inside the SoundWave model. So we'll introduce you to the SoundWave model, it will describe your top 3 voices, and it is very informative. It will make you think. It won't give you all the answers to all the questions you might have. What it will do is to get you to think and generate many more questions about yourself. What it means is, why are these 3 voices the critical things for me? And then, without wishing to talk about too much about all the other things, there's ranges of assessments which go on from there, types of coaching support and development programs that people can participate in to really, really become fully competent in understanding how they talk, the way they talk, why they talk as they do, when they talk as they do.
Yeah. And is SoundWave a psychometric tool? I mean, there's so many tools out there, right? You do personality test, you do psychometric test. Is SoundWave, does it belong to those category of assessments or tools?
Well, it's an assessment, so it has that in common, or at least SoundWave has assessments. I think what SoundWave as an organization is about is really the application of the assessments. So I've got some understanding of how I talk. Well, that's the starting point, not the end. What we're really interested in is people learning to apply talk in new and different and better ways. And that means that as a business, we really want to be sitting down and working with people directly, either in a coaching context or in a training development context, some process of learning. In terms of the assessments themselves, though, to come back to that specific point, no, the assessments are deliberately not psychometrics. They are measures. They include numbers for people who like this sort of stuff. Reports are full of graphs. It's very interesting stuff. But we're not a psychometric fundamentally because we believe that language is fluid. So if you were to complete an assessment today, you'd have a set of results. If you were to complete a SoundWave assessment in a year or 2 years' time, it's quite probable that the look of your results will have changed because you will have developed as a person, and what you're doing with your time may well have changed. You may have changed job. There may have been a significant life change for you. And this will have had an effect at that point in time of how you're going about communicating. Now, if it were a psychometric, psychometrics look to measure reliability. In other words, if I complete a test today and I complete it in 2 years' time, I should have the same result because it's pointing at something which is fixed and unchanging in our personality. Okay, SoundWave is looking at language, it's malleable, it's plastic. We want it to change. We want it to be able to respond to the changes in our circumstances and to the changes in the environments in which we find ourselves. So it's not psychometric, and I feel proud in saying that. If we were to call it anything, we'd say it's a sociometric. It's about our connection with people and society, which is what language is about. Language doesn't exist in isolation. There is no language without society, okay, whether that's our global societies or it's a small family unit or the small business in which we work. There's no language without society.
I just want to thank you for giving me that really good differentiation between a psychometric versus a sociometric. In that a lot of times I think when we're doing a psychometric, it's almost that if this is what your personality is, or if this is what your temperament is, or if this is what your talents are, they're highly unchanging through the years here. But the whole idea that what you're talking about, if I get you correctly, Kevin, is that with the sociometric, it's like almost like a measure, for you to, it's like data, right? It's a data-driven initiative that allows people to change for the better good for themselves in the way they talk. Am I making sense in saying it that way?
Perfectly. I think if you were to complete a SoundWave assessment, you get a result. The question is, where does that result come from? And I think there are two primary components. The first is who you are as a person at that moment in time, okay? The second is, what are you doing? Where are you working? What's your role? Because the environment will have an influence on your results. Now, I did a very quick anecdote. I fed back a SoundWave result to somebody just a few weeks ago. And this was somebody who first took a SoundWave about 5 years ago when they were in a really difficult work situation, highly pressurized, highly stressed. And in fact, this individual did suffer with stress as a consequence of the role that he was engaged in at that time. Then very recently, he retook SoundWave, okay? And I had a session with him and we compared and contrasted two results. Now, whilst there were some threads of similarity in the sense that one or two of the high voices were still there and one of the low voices was still there, there were some quite significant changes in the profile. And this individual was able to say to me, well, of course, what I'm now doing, I really love, and this is playing to my strengths. The role is allowing me to bring forth just my natural capability. In the role I was doing previously, I was under massive pressure, hugely stressed, and deeply unhappy. And so I'm not surprised these things are different, okay? So SoundWave has that type of sensitivity, will pick up on these types of things. By contrast, somebody else, similar thing, 5 years ago, today, very similar profile. They've been doing the same job, they love the same job. There is consistency. There is consistency.
Yeah, I love it.
The great thing,
final point to the bottom line here, Kevin. So, I know for a fact that organizations around the world use SoundWave to develop their leaders, to develop their managers. Organizations use SoundWave to build team dynamics and all that, right? So from your experience all these years, working with organizations globally, what do you see as those tangible and really visible outcomes when teams apply their SoundWave, to their leadership, to their managers, to their executives, to their teams? What outcomes do you see?
Okay, well, I have to go by I think there are two things. Firstly, what do the organizations tell us? So individuals tell us that it's made a big difference to their direct communication and their relationships with their people. That's the first thing. And many, many, many people will say that. By contrast, almost nobody says, this has made no difference to me at all. Okay, that's the first important thing. The second thing is at an organizational level, organizations do come to us and say, we're getting better results. Okay, we're getting better business performance. And we've some quite good evidence around this. Now, I'm not going to be somebody who claims all the benefit for the achievements of client organizations. There are many factors at play that allow organizations to succeed or not. But what we feel quite strongly is that SoundWave is an important ingredient in somebody being successful. Without it, they might not be so successful. And the other thing, and I'm very proud of this, some of the people who come through our programs end up being recognized at a national level. We have a few clients now who, as a consequence of the work they've done with SoundWave and with other things, have gone forward to compete in national competitions for prizes, you know, Leadership of the Year or Continuous Improvement Manager of the Year. And two of these people have been very successful in that space. And they cite SoundWave as being one of the main factors that has allowed them to change their leadership or their management style.
Thank you. I just want to, I'm looking at the time right now. It's like we are 5
Sure.
minutes into the conversation here. And I want to, you know, tackle on something that is really, really important here. How do people get trained to use SoundWave? I mean, I can get up, you know, and do the assessment for myself. But can I become accredited by SoundWave? Can I be trained by SoundWave to apply the assessment, you know, for other people? Share a little bit about that, Kevin.
Yeah, so we have an accreditation program. You can become a SoundWave accredited practitioner. That will give you access to a dashboard, an online dashboard from which you can issue invitations for people to complete the various assessments. B3 that I've mentioned, self-perception, 360 is a thing called 360 Plus, which is the extension of the 360, and something that will be coming fairly shortly called critical relationships. How do people who have either a slightly problematic relationship or possibly even a very good relationship relate to each other. So
Nice.
the accreditation program is 4 days of training, which we do online these days, obviously. Combined with the requirement for individuals to create a short portfolio of practice. So go and do some self-perceptions and 360s, write up your results, come back and tell us about those. And if you've done a good job, we'll accredit you and you can go out in the world and you can practice using the SoundWave assessments.
And is this accreditation restricted to certain geographical areas, or is this a global accreditation?
This is a global accreditation. You should be able to find details of accredited training organizations on the website, soundwave.global. And you can do these programs from anywhere in the world. Obviously, it makes some sense to work with people who are in your time zone, unless you want to spend a week working with people in Latin America on a 14-hour time difference. But that would be your choice. You can go anywhere in the world.
Wonderful, wonderful. I want to move on to something a little bit different. So I hear you, right? I think it's really, to me, when I hear that you are able to be accredited and to be able to apply the tool of SoundWave, you know, to organizations, to teams, it sounded to me like this would also be a great tool to use for relationships that are intimate, right? Between me and my wife, me and my children, you know, me and my, you know, my close friends. Would that be possible, Kevin?
Excuse me. I think the short answer is yes, it is possible. The question to bear in mind is whether, how can I put this? If let's imagine, Kim Pong, you felt you wanted to introduce this to your family, but you're the only person with the knowledge about what SoundWave is. It puts you in a very powerful position vis-a-vis the rest of the family. So you might want to turn around to me as a friend and say, hey, Kevin, you know, your experience with SoundWave, and there are some conversations that I want to have with my family, which are a bit tricky. Can you come and facilitate that for me using your experience of SoundWave? Yeah. And on that basis, I think, you know, third-party intervention in those situations would be really helpful. And yes, SoundWave would work because we're just fundamentally concerned with how people are relating to each other. And, you know, in family situations, our voices are far less constrained than they are when we're in a broader social or work setting. I'm going to be far less constrained. So my criticism might be even more off the edge than it would be at work, or my interrogation, you know, when you don't come home at midnight from your party, might be even more severe than it would be at work. I think I'm just behaving normally, but the people around me are hearing these accentuated, exaggerated voices. So this would be a really good thing to talk about. in a family context. Dad, you know, I know you think you're doing this, but what I'm hearing is this. And the
Mm.
SoundWave framework is very powerful in that context.
Yeah, you know, I just want to share this with you because I got my wife to do the SoundWave Brilliance 3. And both of us really had a good laugh because it's like, you know, I told you, you always are challenging me the wrong way, right? And now she's got evidence in her hands to convict me, right? But I'll tell you the truth here. It is awesome because the awareness of how I talk to my wife, the awareness of how she thinks she talks to me, I tell you, it really does a lot for us in terms of our understanding, in terms of our conversations, in terms of our relationships here. And the other thing is, you know, as we're talking nowadays, you know, she would be a lot more curious about, hey, what voice is that? You know, why don't we switch around and use a different kind of a voice of responding to each other and see how that goes, right? So we are experimenting in our relationship that gives us very tangible articulate tools, right? or verbal tools, or verbal strategies, right, for us to be able to build more intimate relationships, build deeper understanding here. So I absolutely resonate with what you're saying here, Kevin. Now, I just want to ask you one last thing, and then we're going to close really soon. I very often hear you talk about, you know, use this phrase, you know, we're going to, you know, shift the dialogue, we're going to change the conversation, and we're going to shape the culture. What in the world does that mean? It sounds like a whole lot of words here. Shift the dialogue, change the
Yeah.
conversation, shape the culture. What does that mean?
So I think what we're pointing at is a relationship between language and culture. So when people start to talk about cultural change in organizations, very often they talk about very tangible things that have to happen, and then they talk about behavior that needs to change.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, the thing that modifies and modulates a culture is the many, many hundreds of small interactions that take place in a workplace, for example, during the working day. It doesn't matter what big events are going on, if every 100 or 1,000 little conversation is saying a bad thing about the organization or saying a good thing about the organization, this is going to have a significant bearing, a drip, drip, drip bearing on how the culture is directed. And all of this, back to something we started off with, Kim Bong, is happening in the moment, broadly unconsciously. Whether we like it or not, we are maintaining and changing simultaneously the cultures we work and live in through the way we hold our conversations. So what we're trying to do is to come out of this sort of habitual process, look on it and say, well, what's really going on? What culture are we forming as a consequence of our conversations? So by shifting the dialogue, by changing the way we're speaking in a planned way, we can end up changing the conversation and reshaping the culture. And although that sounds, you know, a little bit theoretical, it's actually a very, very practical thing. We can do it in microcosm. You know, you and I can have a little exchange now. You could spend 5 minutes asking me lots of questions, say, taking a real interest in me. I could respond, you ask me how I feel, and we've actually created a little culture between us. On the other hand, you could sit there and you could instruct me on the things that I'm meant to do for the next 10 minutes to finish off this, this communication this morning. You could ask me how I feel. I will feel differently. Okay, I will feel differently. We've created two different streams of culture. Now, which one do we want? And which one are we going to reinforce? And when should we have one or the other? So this is a really, really important thing. I've a reference for people if they're interested, Kim Bong, very, very quickly. It's a fantastic book. It was written quite some years ago now, about 1966. It's by Berger and Luckman, and it's called The Social Construction of Reality. And if you need to understand the theoretical reason why language is so critical to culture, go and buy that book.
Wow, it sounds like a thick book.
It's a heavy book.
Well, I for sure would not be reading that, but I'm going to ask you for a summary, Kevin. I would say that, you know, ever since I knew about SoundWave, it has dramatically impacted my life in the way I talk to people. I've become a lot more cognizant of how people talk and how I listen actually, so that I can respond rather than reply. And I just want to thank you, for dreaming out such a wonderful idea, called SoundWave, and, not just an idea. You essentially have converted an idea into an instrument that global organizations are using it every day to impact their teams, to impact their relationship, to impact people around the world. So I just want to say thank you very much. And indeed, amazing things do happen between people when the quality of the conversations are good. So thank you very much, Kevin. So I think we are all coming to the end, of our session right now. It's 4:50 right now. And once again, I want to apologize to all our friends on Facebook Live. It's one of those things that, technically it just kind of messed up our sound. So I apologize, but we're going to post the video on the StrengthsAsia Facebook page. So, be sure that, you go down there and just download the video. It will also be on YouTube here. Now, before I sign off, once I sign off, don't just run off really quickly. If you're interested in doing, an assessment for yourself to find out a little bit more about how you sound like or how you talk, you can do a really inexpensive assessment called the Brilliance 3. It costs about £20 here. So I'm going to leave the information on how you can get access to the Brilliance 3 assessment, right after I sign off over here. So stay on, don't sign off, right? The information will be up right after this. And the second thing is this, right? If you're interested in joining us for a half-day workshop where we're going to use the Brilliance 3 results to help you, understand a little bit more about how you talk and how you can use the way you talk to have more effective, communication and influential conversations with people. We're going to be running a workshop very, very soon. And same thing, I'm going to leave the information right after this here. And finally, for those of you who are interested in wanting to find out more about becoming accredited as a SoundWave coach practitioner, go to the SoundWave, global website, which I am going to be showing you right on top of the screen right now. So go to www.soundwave.global. The information is all on the website here. So ladies and gentlemen, once again, thank you very much. And Kevin, I just want to thank you so much, calling all the way early in the morning from Bristol, UK. So thank you so much. And once again, remember, join us next week, again, 4 p.m. We'll continue with this 4-part series. You own the conversation with the final topic, talk is action. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to wish you a great day ahead and also a great weekend. So Kevin, once again, bye-bye, everybody. Thanks again, bye-bye. See you soon. Take care.
I think I'll try this a new way. Gonna show you the truth that I know. I'm getting tired of talking, and I need more of a show right now. It's time that you made your mind up, 'cause lately all it ever does is change. Feels like we're only talking, going round and around, back around. I will fight like no other every day. I won't stop like the others. I will stay. 'Cause now is the right time, and I'm feeling alright. I'm playing your game like I know I can win right now. It's a fun road. You got me up tonight, 'cause loving you is like I'm walking a tightrope so high. I won't be turning around. No, I won't be turning around. It's the right time. Feeling alright. I'm playing the game like I will win tonight. I think I'll do it on my way. I'm gonna show you what I'm going through. Get you out of your comfort zone. 'Cause I need more of the truth right now. It's time that you made your mind.